اهلا بيكم في كايرو دار. النهارده هنبدا نتكلم عن ريفيجن اون ذا ريبرودكشن ان ليفينج اورجانيزمز. هنقدم كميه كبيره جدا من الاسئله والانسرز بتاعتها، هتعمل لنا ريفيجن على نقط كتير جدا احنا مذاكرينها اوريدي او محتاجين نعمل ستريس بس عليها. نبدا في اول سؤال عندنا ده multiple choice question. Choose the correct answer. Some algae can reproduce by dots, conjugation, sporogony, binary fission, all the previous. We understand that the right answer is all the previous because the spirogyra algae reproduce by conjugation, and also a great number of algae can reproduce by the presence of spores, and the spirogyra also can divide by the binary fission during the favorable condition or the suitable condition, by the conjugation during the unsuitable condition or the unfavorable conditions. So the answer is all the previous. But the second point is the reproduction of Plasmodium malaria to produce merozoites occurs by binary fission, fragmentation, sporogony, regeneration. The Plasmodium reproduction takes place by the alternation of generation. Alternation of generation means that the life cycle includes the two generations, one of them as a result of sexual reproduction, but the other as a result of the asexual reproduction. So the reproduction that takes place by the fragmentation, which act as a kind of reproduction, which is called the schizogony. So the answer is the fragmentation. The next question. The cells of spirogyra contain. We understand that the body cell of the spirogyra 1N, because when the fusion takes place during the conjugation between two spirogyra cells that form zygote 2N. So the cells of the spirogyra haploid cells, or the answer is the half the number of the chromosomes of the zygote, because the zygote 2N and the zygote formed as a fusion between two cells of spirogyra, each 1N. So the somatic cells or the body cells of the spirogyra haploid, so containing the half number of the chromosomes of the zygote, which act as a last choice. The next from the X endospermic seeds is. احنا عندنا حاجتين في موضوع السيدز ده، يا اندوسبرميك سيدز يعني فيها اندوسبرم ولازم تبقى مونوكوت، يا اكس endospermic seeds يعني the endosperm is consumed during the feeding of the embryo on the endosperm, so the seed containing the two cotyledons instead of the presence of the endosperm. يبقى لما يقول لي endospermic seeds ادور على مونوكوت، هلاقي كل التشويز الباقي دايكوت. او العكس، لو بيقول لي على الاكس اندوسبرميك سيد يبقى انا بدور على دايكوت والباقي كله مونوكوت. لما نيجي نقول ميز، الميز ده مونوكوت اللي هو الذره، ويت مونوكوت، دي ديت برضو مونوكوت، لكن البي اللي هي البسله دي دايكوت، يبقى لازم دي تبقى رايت انسر. The last point an example of the endospermic seeds، يبقى انا عايز حاجه واحده بس تبقى في التشويز مونوكوت وهي الويت، وبالتالي رايت انسر هنا هتبقى ويت. The next question. Choose the correct answer with the suitable words. In the human embryo, the umbilical cord is formed by the fusion of the umbilical cord is formed due to the fusion of the edges of the amnion membrane, so that act as a right answer because the chorion membrane connect together to form the villi of the placenta. The next question. Alternation of generation is reproduced in the life cycle of. We need life cycle of alternation of generations, means the cycle includes two generations. One is produced as a result of sexual reproduction, but the other as a result of asexual reproduction. So the amoeba is not act as a right answer, but schistosoma, which is called the bilharzia worms, the life cycle includes the alternation of generation, which is the right answer. Yeast and toads is not right answer. The next. Sporogony takes place in all of the following organisms except. Sporogony means the reproduction by the presence or by the production of spores. The adiantum in adiantum that takes place containing, or the reproduction takes place by spores. So sporogony takes place in adiantum. Also plasmodium, which causes malaria, the formation of sporozoites that act as a result of the sporogony, which act as a kind of asexual reproduction which takes place inside the female Anopheles mosquito. The mushroom, which act as a kind of the example of the fungi, and most of the fungi reproduce asexually by the presence of spores, but the hydra act as an exception. So the hydra is not reproduced by the sporogony, but it can reproduce by regeneration and also can reproduce by budding. The next, FSH hormone, which is called the follicle stimulating hormone, is secreted from the FSH hormone and the LH hormone are secreted from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, or the part of the pituitary gland which is called the adenohypophysis. So gravium follicle is not right answer. The pituitary gland is the right answer. The next question. Gravium follicle secretes progesterone, estrogen, FSH hormone, LH hormone. The answer is the estrogen. That's act as a hormone which is called the estradiol hormone. يبقى الجرافيوم فوليكل بتعمل استروجين أو اسمه estradiol. But the next part is the genetic crossing over takes place during mitosis, meiosis, fertilization, the cleavage. The answer is the meiosis division. We understand that the crossing over takes place during the first meiotic division, where the presence of tetrad or the outer chromatids, which are called the parental, but the inner chromatid, which are called the crossing over chromatids, where crossing takes place between the two inner chromatids, and the exchange of the inner chromatids takes place, that act as a process that form the genetic variation. So the right answer is meiosis. The next, during the active reproductive life of the woman, about dots ova only mature. The answer is 400, 200 from each ovary, and each ovary or the two ovaries alternate to produce one ovum each 28 days. So that need about 30 years. So the maturation takes place after about 15 years. After that 13 years, which act as a life fertility of the female. So after that about 54 to 50, that act as a stage which is called the menopausis stage, where the absence of the ova from the ovaries. The next question, choose the correct answer with a suitable word. The gravium follicle secretes. That's act as a all the questions, that's the estrogen. The next question, fertilization in human takes place in the uterus, vagina, ovary, the fallopian tube. We know that the fertilization takes place at the first third part of the fallopian tube. The next question, the following diagram show the reproduction in living organism, which depends on the alternation of generation. Without the presence of the diagram, we can answer the question man, the monocot plant, dicot plant, furnace. We understand that the alternation of generation takes place in furnace without the presence of the diagram. But the diagram explains the presence of two stages, one of them which act as the sporophyte, but the second is the gametophyte. The sporophyte produce the spore, which act as a haploid cell. The spore germinate to form the green heart-shaped structure, which is called the gametophyte. The gametophyte produce or divide by mitosis to produce the male and the female gamete, which fuse together to form the zygote that form the sporophyte, which act as a diploid stage or the dominant stage. The following living organisms form zygote except Spirogyra. Spirogyra forms the zygospore after the conjugation or the fusion between the two gametes. Adiantum, in adiantum, male and the female gametes fused together to form a zygote, which grow to form the sporophyte. Amoeba and Plasmodium. In the Plasmodium malaria, we know that the presence of the gametocytes, which pass from the human blood to the cavity of the stomach, female mosquito, that's causing activation of the gametes, and diffusion takes place to form a zygote. The zygote change into ookinete. So the exception is the amoeba, because there is no zygote formed in the life cycle of the amoeba cells. The next. Estradiol is called dot hormone. بيسألنا الاسم الثاني بتاع الاستراديول هو ايه؟ طبعا الاستراديول is a sterogen which is secreted from the gravium follicle, the corpus luteum, after that the placenta. So the answer is the sterogen. The next. In the life cycle of fern, the sporophyte reproduce asexually by, in ferns, the sporophyte that produce spores, so that takes place by the spores, which act as a kind of asexual reproduction, which is called the sporogeny. The next. The number of chromosomes in the is reproduced during the spermatogenesis in the dot phases. The number of chromosomes is reduced, means it change from diploid into haploid. That takes place during the maturation, where the meiosis division takes place in the maturation only. So the meiosis is a kind of division which reduces the number of chromosomes from 2n into 1n. Meiosis 1 occur during the spermatogenesis in the dot phase. Also, in the meiosis 1 or meiosis 2, both of them takes place during the maturation, which is the right answer. Through alternation of generation in fern plants, 2n is or are formed a sporophyte, spores, gametes, a gametophyte. The question act as the presence or the generation of fern plants. That's through the alternation of generation fern plant to some formed the sporophyte, because we understand that the sporophyte is formed due to the fusion between male and female gamete, which forms the zygote, and the zygote developed or divided by mitosis to produce the sporophyte. So during the alternation of generation in the fern plants as the adiantum or polypodium plant, the 2n formed by the sporophyte. But the spores, the gametophyte, the gametes, all of them haploid, because the sporophyte need the presence of or form the leaves, and the lower part of the leaf, which containing the sorus, the sori, each sorus containing the sporangium, which containing cells that divided by meiosis to produce a haploid cell, which is a spore. The spore grow to form the gametophyte. The gametophyte to form the gametes by mitosis. So the spores, the gametes, and the gametophyte are haploid, but the sporophyte is a diploid stage. Correct the red words. So the red word act as a wrong word. So correct these red words. The first part is the malaria fever result from the infection with the Bilharzia in man. We understand that the Plasmodium act as a parasite which causing the malaria disease. The next is the cells of the Spirogyra containing double number of chromosomes of the zygote. The cells of Spirogyra قلنا لسه من شوية انها 1n. طيب الزيجوت 2n. يبقى لازم السيلز دي containing the half number of the chromosomes of the zygote, or haploid that of the zygote. The third point, two identical twins are produced from the fertilization of two ova by two sperms. Two ova by two sperms that form the fraternal twins, but the identical twins are formed due to the fusion of one ovum with one sperm only, but they divided after that into two embryonic masses, each developed to form an embryo. So the two twins or the two identical twins are similar to each other in the sex, in the blood group, in the skin color, in the hair color, the eye color. They are genetically similar to each other. The hyaluronic acid stimulates the mature ova to liberate from the gravium follicle. We understand that the stimulus of the gravium follicle to release the mature ova and change into corpus luteum, that's the hormone which is secreted from the pituitary gland, which is called the luteinizing hormone or the LH hormone. Identical twins result from the ova and two sperms. اتفقنا انه لما يقول لي identical يبقى one ova with one sperm، لكن عايز two ova with two sperms تبقى fraternal twins, which is the right answer. The next question. The identical twins result from the fertilization of قلنا one ovum with one sperm. The next. برضو two identical twins produced from the fertilization. خلاص يبقى هنا قلنا the identical twins طالما one ova with one sperm، لكن لما يبقى two ova with two sperms تبقى الانسر هنا fraternal twins علشان تبقى two ova. Sporozoites are the infective stage of the female anopheles mosquito. احنا عندنا في اللايف سايكل دي two infective stages، واحده للهيومن بينج، ولما يقول لي مين الانفكتيف ستيج اوف ذا هيومن بينج دي تبقى سبوروزايتس، لكن الانفكتيف ستيج اوف ذا فيميل انوفيلس موسكيتو is the gametocytes which transfer from the human blood to the mosquito if the healthy mosquito bites the patient, and during the sucking of the blood the gametophyte get inside the cavity of the female anopheles mosquito and they activate it and fertilization takes place to form zygote or ookinete and so on. So the gametocytes is the right answer. The vagina is the line with the cilia to direct the ova toward the uterus. The fallopian tube is lined with the cilia that to facilitate the passage of the ovum through the fallopian tube to get inside the uterus. Sertoli cells. Sertoli cells secrete the androgens as a testosterone hormone. We understand that the male hormones, the androgens, and which is act as a testosterone and androsterone hormones, they are secreted from the interstitial cells, and they are responsible for the appearance of the male secondary sexual characters. The next question. The exchange of peace between the internal chromatids, the piece between the internal chromatids after pairing of the homologous chromosomes. We understand that this exchange that's called the crossing over. So during the crossing over, the presence of the attachment point of the crossing over chromatids, which is called the chiasma, at the chiasma the exchange takes place that during the crossing over. The next is the fusion of two male nuclei, one with the egg cell and the other with the two embryo sac nuclei. That's act as a triple fusion, act as a double fertilization, because the fertilization takes place of the ovum to form a zygote, and the other fertilization that's called the triple fusion, which is a fusion between the one of the two male nuclei with the two embryo sac nuclei to form 3N, which is called the endosperm. Number 3, the ability of the egg to develop into new individual without being fertilized by male gamete. That's called the spermatogenesis. The spermatogenesis is the ability of the ovum to develop to produce complete individual without fertilization. A membrane, its margins fused, forming the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord is formed due to the fusion of the amnion, but the chorion forms the villi of the placenta. The next question. The fusion of male nucleus with the two embryo sac nuclei. One male nucleus, two embryo sac nuclei that form 3N, that's the endosperm, so that's called the triple fusion. The next. nutritional tissue surround the embryo sac inside the flower ovary. Inside the flower ovary is the presence of new cells which act as a tissue or the nutritive tissue that feed the embryo sac. The next, replacing the unfertilized egg nucleus by an embryonic cell nucleus of the same kind of living organism. Replacement of nucleus with the other ones that called the renucleation. renucleation يعني جبت نيوكليس شلتها وحطيت مكانها نيوكليس ثانيه، فاحنا كده بنسمي ده renucleation. The four cells which result from the meiotic division of the spore mother cell during the pollen grain formation. هنا بيتكلم عن الميكروسبورز. الميكروسبورز دول 4 cells produced as a result of the meiotic division of the spore mother cell. The next, give reason for each of the following. Chromosomal material duplicate during the somatic cell division. أي cell هتعمل division لازم تعمل duplication of the genetic material to form 2 chromosomal sets to allow each of the 2 new cells to get complete copy of the genetic material. Removal of corpus luteum before the 4th month leads to abortion. We understand that the corpus luteum responsible for the secretion of estrogen and progesterone hormone, which is responsible for the supplying the endometrium with the blood capillary and also adheres the endometrium in the uterine muscles that also the endometrium grow due to the presence of the estrogen and progesterone hormone. So the removing of the corpus luteum before the 4th month that leads to abortion due to the absence of the estrogen and the progesterone hormone. But after the 4th month the placenta is formed and the degeneration takes place of the corpus luteum, so that means the placenta can produce a sufficient amount of estrogen and progesterone hormone, so the corpus luteum degenerates. That's before the 4th month. يبقى انا عندي دلوقتي لو after الفورث مانث، بعد الفورث مانث مش هيجرى حاجه لان البلاسينتا اوريدي بتكون اتعملت، بتعمل استروجين وبروجستيرون. لكن بيفور الفورث مانث لا لسه ما فيش بلاسينتا، يبقى لو شلت الكوربس لوتيم هيقل الاستروجين والبروجستيرون، endometrium growth of endometrium and the adhering of the endometrium in the uterine muscle that decrease, so that leads to abortion. The human embryo is surrounded by the ammonium and the chorion membrane in the uterus. كأنه بيقول لنا الامونيوم بيعمل ايه والكوريوم بيعمل ايه. احنا نعرف ان الامونيوم edges that connect together to form the umbilical cord, which connect between the ampullus of the fetus and the placenta of the mother, and also the amnion containing the amniotic fluid that protect the embryo against shocks and dryness. But the outer membrane, which is called the chorion, the outer chorion edges connect together to form the villi of the placenta, which is responsible for carrying the food and the nutritive substance and the oxygen from the mother to the embryo and the wastes from the embryo to the mother through this part which is called the placenta. The next question. Gametophyte stage in fern plants is haploid. نشوف اللايف سايكل. طب الجاميتوفايت جه منين؟ ده كان فيه سبور. طب السبور دي كانت ايه؟ دي كانت واد ان. طب هي جت منين؟ جت من السبورانجيوم اللي موجوده في السبوروفايت. احنا قلنا السبوروفايت containing leaves والlower leaf of the sporophyte containing each sorus containing a great number of sporangia. Each sporangium containing cells that divided by meiosis to change the 2n into 1n or the diploid into haploid. Each haploid cell is called the spore, which surround itself with a thick coat can tolerate the hard conditions. So the gametophyte is formed by the mitotic division of the spore cell, which is the haploid. هو دايما اي 1n ما ينفعش يعمل division by meiosis ابدا، عشان ما فيش اختراع اسمه 1n اسمه half n. ال 1n تعمل division by mitosis بس. The next question. The oral contraceptive pills or are used daily in birth control. Sorry, the oral contraceptive pills or tablets that takes daily to birth for the birth control. We know that the tablets or the tablets which containing artificial or synthetic estrogen and the progesterone hormone that leads to form the pregnant hormonal condition of the female. The presence of high concentration of estrogen and the progesterone that prevent the formation or the secretion of FSH hormone from the pituitary gland. احنا لما نوصل لما يبقى في بريجننس ستيت يبقى في استروجين وبروجستيرون عالي، يا اما في الفورس مانث الاولانيه وده بيبقى من الكوربس ليوتام، يا اما بعد الفورس مانث تبقى من البلاسينتا. يعني طول ما في بريجننس في استروجين وبروجستيرون عالي يبقى ما فيش اوفيوليشن، ما فيش FSH هرمون اصلا، يعني ما فيش جرافيان فوليكل هتتعمل فيها اوفم. طب احنا لو عايزين بقى نخلي البيتيوتري جلاند ما تعملش FSH هرمون، يبقى الفوليكل ستيميوليتنج هرمون ده علشان ما يتعملش محتاج هاي كونسنتريشن اوف استروجين اند بروجستيرون. علشان كده التابلتس او البيلز دي take daily to inhibit the secretion of FSH hormone. The next point is the plant ovary start to enlarge and even forming the fruit. We understand that the ovary of the flower is stimulated by the presence of auxin. The concentration or the high concentration of auxin of the ovary of the flower that stimulate the growth of the ovary to change into fruit. If that takes place or the auxin takes place naturally due to the pollination and the fertilization, that's form fruit with seeds which act as a kind of sexual reproduction. But the stimulation of the ovary, but the spraying of the auxin on the stigma of the flower that stimulates the ovary to form fruit without seeds, and that's not act as a kind of reproduction. Stopping of the menstrual cycle during the pregnancy. احنا لسه قلنا مش هيبقى فيه menstrual cycle، يعني مفيش FSH هرمون اصلا عشان يحصل proliferation stage، يبقى ده معناه ان هو due to the presence of estrogen and progesterone hormone which is secreted from the corpus luteum and the placenta. Fallopian tube begin with the funnel shaped opening and lined with cilia. The funnel shaped opening with the finger-like protrusion for picking the mature ova which is produced from the ovary and directed by the presence of cilia inside the fallopian tube, where fertilization takes place as the first third part. After that, the ovum can or the zygote can pass inside the fallopian tube due to the presence of the cilia. The next question. Bean seeds are X-endospermic seeds, where the weight grain are endospermic. احنا قلنا اي endospermic seeds يبقى دي monocot containing endosperm inside the seed. But the dicot, where the absence of endosperm or the endosperm is consumed by the embryo, so it containing two cotyledons that act as a food stored inside the seed for the feeding or for the growth of the embryo. The next question. The presence of the Sertoli and the interstitial cells in the human male testes. كأنه بيقول لي السيرتولي بتعمل ايه والانترستيشيال سيلز بتعمل ايه. احنا قلنا ان السيرتولي دي responsible for the secretion of nutritive substance to feed the sperms, and also the Sertoli cells have an immunization function. But the interstitial cell responsible for the secretion of the male hormones as the androgen or androsterone and the testosterone hormone. The micropyle remain in the ovum after the fertilization. We understand that the embryo sac is surrounded by two layers or two coats of the embryo sac, except the presence of certain part which is called the micropyle, which is not covered by the two integuments. The presence of micropyle in the flower that facilitates the passage of the pollen tube for the fertilization of the embryo sac. But the presence of the micropyle in seeds that to allow the water to pass through it for the germination of the seed. The presence of cilia that line the fallopian tube in the human female. We mentioned that to allow the fallopian tube to move the ovum toward the uterus. By the help of the diagram which represent a transverse section in the seminiferous tubule in the testes, write the numbers from 1 to 4, from 1 to 6. Number 1 is the interstitial cells. Number 2, that's the answer, is the spermatogonia. The third is the primary spermatocyte. The second is the spermatid. The number 4 the spermatid. Number 5 spermis. Number 6 Sertoli cells. احنا لو خدنا اللايرز دي هبدا باول واحده تبقى سبرماتوجونيا، وبعدين اللي بعدها ناحيه جوه برايمري سبرماتوسايت، وبعدين الثالثه تبقى سكندري سبرماتوسايت، الرابعه تبقى سبرماتيدز، اخر واحده تبقى سبيرمز. اوكي. في كل دول هنشوف السؤال اللي بعده عشان هو السؤال اللي جاي اللي انا كنت هقول مين فيهم يبقى 2 ان ومين يبقى 1 ان. طبعا هنفتكر ان هنا انترستيشيال سيلز ودي اسمها سيرتولي سيلز. What are the function of the structures 1 and 6? One that's interstitial cells. Interstitials means the cells between the two seminiferous tubules. كلمة interstitial يعني بين وبين، يبقى بين السيمينيفرous tubules في cells كده اسمها interstitial cells that responsible for the secretion of the male hormones. But number 6 is the Sertoli cells, which are responsible for the secretion of nutritive substance to feed the sperms, and they have an immunization function. Immunization function هنا عشان تعمل immunity للسبرمس عشان ما يحصلش infection للسبرمس، فهنا بتبقى في substance secreted by the Sertoli cells. The next mentions the chromosomal number that represented by the numbers 2, 3, 4 and 5. احنا علشان نحل الاشكال بتاع 1n و 2n احنا نقدر نقول ان عند الهيومن ميل the spermatids, secondary spermatocyte, haploid. All the other cells are diploid. يبقى انا عندي كل الهيومن ميل ده diploid ما عدا الثلاثه دول. الثلاثه دول اللي هم ايه؟ spermatids, secondary spermatocyte. كاني هاخد السبرمز دي اول واحده، سبرماتيدز اللي بعدها secondary spermatocyte، خلاص بعد كده البرايمري spermatocyte دي 2n والسبرماتوجونيا وكل ده يبقى ديبلويد. يبقى هنلاقي هنا كله ديبلويد، لكن في السبرماتيدز والسبرمس والسكندري سبرماتوسايت لو طلبها مننا برضو دي هابلويد علشان دي جت من الفيرست مايوتيك ديفيجن اوف ذا برايمري سبرماتوسايت. The next. By the help of the diagram which represents the section in the human ovary, mention the numbers from 1 to 5. The answer is very simple because it acts as a diagram. احنا المفروض بنرسم الدياجرام وبنعمله وبنرسم نكتب الليبلز عليه. ده هنا جاي مرسوم وبيقول لك اعمل انت الليبلز بس، فدي تبقى اسهل. طبعا هنا نمبر 1 ده اوسايت، نمبر 2 جرافيان فوليكل بعد ما حصل لها ديفلوبمنت شويه. طب الجرافيان فوليكل لما يجي يوصل لها ال اتش هرمون هتعمل ريليز للماتشور اوفا اللي هي نمبر 4، لكن الجرافيان فوليكل نفسها تتحول لنمبر 5 اللي هي الكوربس ليوتين. لكن طبعا نمبر 3 داون اللي هو الابيثيليال سيلز ذات سراوند ذا اوفري. احنا نعرف ان اي epithelial tissue the tissue that covers the whole body organs and line the internal cavities. The ovary act as the organ, so the outer membrane act as the ovarian epithelial cells. Mention the function of number 2 and number 5. Number 2 is the Gravian follicle, number 5 is the corpus luteum. The Gravian follicle responsible for the secretion of estrogen hormone, which is called the estradiol, that help in the increasing the thickness of the endometrium. But the corpus luteum responsible for the secretion of estrogen and progesterone hormone, and the two hormones are very important for the supplying the endometrium with a sufficient amount of blood capillaries, or the vascularity of the endometrium, adhere the endometrium in the uterine muscle, and also that increase the thickness of the endometrium. The second part, explain what happened to the structure number 5 if the ovum is not fertilized. Structure number 5 is a corpus luteum. If the ovum is not fertilized, the corpus luteum will degenerate. We understand that the ovum survive for about 1 to 2 days, but the sperms still survive in the female genital system from 2 to 3 days. If the ovum is not fertilized after 1 to 2 days, the degeneration takes place of the corpus luteum, so the secretion of estrogen of the progesterone hormone decrease that leads to the menstruation. But if the ovum is fertilized, that means that will form the zygote, that responsible for the secretion of the hormones that help the corpus luteum to grow, to increase the concentration of estrogen and the progesterone hormone in the blood, to increase the thickness of the endometrium and adhere the endometrium in the uterine muscle. The corpus luteum will grow to reach the maximum growth at the 3rd month, and degenerates at the 4th month due to the presence of or the formation of the placenta. The next question. Select from the column B what suits for the column A. الأسئلة بتاعت الماتشز دي أسئلة سهلة قوي. ده أنا بديك سؤال وبدي إجابة، أنا بس أركز شوية خلاص تبقى المسألة دي سهلة قوي قوي. Column A بيقول لي the sporophyte is dominance. Number 2, there is endosperm. The sporophyte is dominance that in the adiantum. It's act as a dominant stage, which is still to produce the spores. But the endometrium, the endospermic seeds that act as a monocot seed, which containing endosperm as a weight grain. So the answer, the sporophyte is dominant in the adiantum, but the endospermic seeds as a weight grains. Grain طبعا because it act as a fruit, act as a fruit with one seed on. The ovary wall, the ovary tissue, the integuments, the two integuments, all of them are harded together to form the grain, so the grain act as a fruit. The next question. Polar bodies, prostate gland, acrosome, corpus luteum. That's the column A. But the column B containing number A act as accessory gland in the genital system in men. لما ادور في الدول على accessory gland الاقي في prostate gland that act as accessory gland. طب نيجي للثانيه. secrete progesterone hormone. يبقى انا بتكلم في corpus luteum، هو من دول بس اللي responsible for the secretion of the progesterone hormone. secrete thyroxine hormone. ده انا محتاج يبقى في حاجه اسمها ثايرويد جلاند ومش موجوده في دول، يبقى ما عنديش حاجه الاختيار نمبر سي. produce enzymes during the fertilization of the ovum. ده الاكروسوم اللي responsible for the secretion of hyaluronase enzymes that dissolve the hyaluronic acid to remove the coat around the ovum to facilitate its penetration. The last point is the are produced during the meiosis of the ovary of the female. لما اجي اقول ان احنا بنعمل ovum او بنعمل female gamete، يبقى لازم ال one mother cell after the meiosis one change into the haploid cell and the polar body. But at the last or the second meiotic division, the presence of the ovule and the 3 polar bodies, and in the human female the presence of ovum and the 3 polar bodies. So the answer, the polar body produced during the meiosis of the ovary of the female. The prostate gland act as accessory gland. the acrosome produce the enzyme which is called the hyaluronase enzyme during the fertilization, the corpus luteum responsible for the secretion of the progesterone hormone. The next question. LH or luteinizing hormone, progesterone hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. وبعدين بنيجي في الكولم بي نلاقي acts to increase the thickness of the endometrium. يبقى انا بدور هنا على progesterone hormone help the contraction of the unstriated muscles اللي بعدها stimulates the ovary to grow gravium follicle. عشان نعمل gravium follicle انا محتاج follicle stimulating hormone ده number 3. وبعدين stimulates the liberation of the ovum from the gravium follicle. يبقى انا بتكلم عن luteinizing hormone or the LH hormone. So that is the right answer. The next question. Column A. Reproduction in amoeba occurs by reproduction in yeast, the reproduction aphid insect, reproduction in mushroom, reproduction in starfish, reproduction in spirogyra. يبقى هنيجي في ماتش بي هنلاقي الكلام ده سهل قوي لانه حاجات بسيطه. في نمبر A لما اجي الاقي دي بارسينوجينسيس، اشوف مين في دول تعمل ريبرودكشن باي بارسينوجينسيس. هنلاقي الافيد انسكت والبي بلانت لو كان في بي بلانت. وبعدين سكيزوجوني اور فراجمنتيشن، يبقى احنا بنتكلم عن البلازموديوم اللي اوف ملاريا ده اللي كان بيعمل ريبرودكشن باي سكيزوجوني. باينري فيشن يبقى انا عايز اي حاجه يوني سيلولار زي الاميبا اللي مديهاني في نمبر 1. سبوروجني يبقى انا محتاج حاجه تعمل ريبرودكشن باي سبورز زي الفانجاي زي المشروم فانجس. ريجنريشن يبقى انا بتكلم في ستار فيش، بتكلم في هايدرا، بتكلم في بلاناريا، واحنا عندنا ستار فيش. بادنج يبقى محتاج اقول ييست او هايدرا، واحنا عندي في نمبر 2 في ييست. وبعد كده كونجوجيشن ده سبايروجايرا. يبقى الانسرز بتاعتنا هتبقى بالشكل ده. طالما اميبا يبقى باينري فيشن، طالما ييست تبقى بادنج، طالما بيقول افيد انسكت تبقى بارسينوجينسيس that takes place during the season of the year. مشروم يبقى ده سبورز تبقى دي سبوروجني، وبعد كده ستار فيش تبقى ريجنريشن، وبعد كده سبايروجايرا تبقى باي كونجوجيشن. The next question. tube nucleus, male nucleus, generative nucleus. وبعدين نيجي في الكولم بي نلاقي converts into antipodal cells. طبعا الانتيبودال cells that the three cells that away from the micropyle inside the embryo sac of the ovary of the flower. لما اجي اشوف participate in the formation of the endometrium endospermic nucleus. لما بنتكلم في endospermic nucleus يبقى ديا two nucleus that migrate from each of the four groups in the two embryo sac nuclei. لما جينا اتكلمنا في ازاي بيتعمل الامبريو ساك قلنا انه بيبقى فيه وحده سبورمازر سيل، وبعدين تعمل مايوزس تدي 1 امبريو ساك و3 بولار باديز. الامبريو ساك تعمل 3 successive mitosis division تدي 8 cells each 4 or 4 from each pole from the embryo sac. One of them migrate as the center of the embryo sac to form the two embryo sac nuclei. Divides to form the tissue, supply the embryo with the food. يبقى هنا بنتكلم عن النيو سيلس دي التيشو اللي بتعمل supplying للامبريو ساك. لكن لو قلنا امبريو بس يبقى احنا بنتكلم عن التيشو اللي بنسميها endosperm which act as a food for the embryo. Forms tubes reach the micropyle inside. يبقى بنتكلم عن البولين تيوب nucleus. فورم 2 ميل نيوكلاي يبقى بتكلم في الجنريتيف نيوكليوس. الجنريتيف نيوكليوس كانت كل واحده هابلويد لكن تعمل ميتوزس ديفيجن عشان تدي 2 ميل نيوكلاي، علشان واحده تعمل فيوجن وذ 2 امبريو ساك نيوكلاي تو فورم اندوسبيرم، وده اللي بنقول عليه فيرتلايزيشن تريبل فيوجن. وبعدين في فيرتلايزيشن تاني عشان يبقى دبل فيرتلايزيشن اللي هي 1 اوف ذا 2 ميل نيوكلاي with the XL to form zygote. الماتش ده الثلاثه دول سهلين. التيوب نيوكليوس دي علشان تعمل التيوب اللي هتعدي الميكروبايل، والميل نيوكليوس دي participate in the formation of the endosperm nucleus علشان دي بتعمل فيوجن مع التو امبريو ساك نيوكلاي، والجنريتيف نيوكليوس ديت اللي بتعمل الميل نيوكلاي. The next question. What would happen in each of the following case with giving reason؟ اخد بالي لما يقول لي what happened ولا what happened with give reason. with give reason يبقى عايز اقول ال happen ده ليه. طيب if the corpus luteum degenerates in the 4th month، لما يقول لي the 4th month degeneration of the corpus luteum takes place, that nothing will happen because at the 4th month the placenta is formed and also the placenta secrete estrogen and progesterone hormone. Spraying of water or ether extract of the pollen grains over stigma of the flower. ده احنا فاكرين كان اسمه بارسينوكاربي. لما اجي اعمل spraying the stigma of the flower with the extraction of the pollen grain or with a certain auxin as a naphthol acetic acid or an indole acetic acid that stimulate the ovary to grow to form fruit without the presence of seeds. علشان كده بنقول ان البارسينوكاربي is not act as a kind of reproduction. It just growth of the ovary to change into fruit. That's called the artificial parthenocarpy. Exposure of the frog eggs to heat shocks. Heat shock, or by the jerking or checking, or by the expose the egg to thermal shocks or electric shocks, or by the presence of certain salts around the eggs, or by prick the egg with a needle. All of these stimuli that stimulate the egg of the ovary to develop to form complete individual without fertilization, so that's called the parthenogenesis or the artificial parthenogenesis. The first question, secretion of the insufficient amount of FSH hormone and the LH or luteinizing hormone in the married woman. The question asks about the function of FSH hormone and the LH hormone. We know that the FSH hormone, which is secreted from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, that stimulate the ovary of the female to develop to produce the mature ova, inside to produce the gravium follicle which containing the ovum. But the LH hormone or luteinizing hormone stimulate the gravium follicle to release the mature ova and change into corpus luteum. So that means the menstruation will stop due to the absence of the FSH hormones or the absence of any ova. The absence of FSH hormone means the absence of gravium follicle, means no secretion of estrogen or estradiol hormone. And the absence of LH hormone or decreasing the sufficient amount of LH hormone, that means that not form the corpus luteum, and that means there is no estrogen and progesterone hormone in the blood. The next question. What would happen? The two testes lie inside the body cavity in man. We understand that the temperature inside the body of the human being is very high, and that not act as a suitable temperature to form the sperms. So if the testis is still inside the body and not descend in the scrotum sac, where the temperature about 34 Celsius, but inside the body about 37 Celsius, the high temperature is not suitable temperature for the formation of sperms, so that leads to sterility or the absence of the sperms. The next point, the two ovaries are eradicated from the pregnant woman in the first months. Pregnant woman والفيرست ثيرد مانث يبقى انا محتاج الكوربس ليوتيم اللي جوه الاوفريز. طب لو عملت eradication او removing او destroy للتو ovaries, that means the absence or removing the corpus luteum. The removal of the corpus luteum leads to decrease the estrogen and the progesterone hormone, so abortion takes place. يبقى انا لما اجي اجاوب اقول هيحصل abortion دوت happen، وبعدين اقول اللي بتاعها علشان الكوربس luteum هو اللي كان بيعمل estrogen and progesterone hormones. The next question, polypodium plant spore cells fall on a dry soil. We understand that the spore needs the presence of mud soil. Mud soil means soil containing a sufficient amount of water that to stimulate the spore to germinate to form the green heart-shaped structure which is called the gametophyte. طب هو بيقول لي هنا dry soil يبقى nothing will happen. That means the spore is not germinate and no gametophyte will form it due to the absence of water. The next point, the absence of the midpiece of sperm. ندور بقى في السبرم. كان عندي هيد فيها نيوكليوس وفيها اكروسوم، وعندي نيك فيها سنتريولز علشان نعمل ديفيجن للزايجوت. طب اجي بعد كده الاقي الميد بيس. الميد بيس دي اللي بيسال فيها دي فيها كان ايه؟ فيها ميتوكوندريا. Mitochondria they act as a center of energy production to produce sufficient amount of energy to help the sperm to move to reach the ovum for the fertilization. So no form or no formation of midpiece or absence of mitochondria means the absence of energy. So the sperm can't move to reach the ovum. So no fertilization of this sperm takes place. The next point. Surrounding the ovule and the plant during the formation of completely with the two integuments. The question asked about if the surrounding the ovule or the embryo sac of the plant during the formation is completely surrounded by the integuments. We understand that the two integuments surround the embryo sac except the micropyle. Complete surrounding of the integuments, that means the absence of micropyle. Absence of micropyle, that means no fertilization takes place. The pollen tube can't get inside the embryo sac, so no fertilization takes place. So that means the flower will wilt and die. الحقيقه مش هنقول طبعا نو جيرمينيشن لان هو خلاص طالما ما حصلش اصلا ما حصلش فيرتلايزيشن يبقى انا مش هيبقى في سيدز، فبالتالي مش محتاج ان انا اقول السكند فانكشن اوف مايكروبايل اللي هي الباسج اوف ووتر فور جيرمينيشن. Compare between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. الحقيقه الاسئله بتاعه الكومباريزون عايزه حضرتك تبقى فاهم كويس، نبقى فاهمين كويس قوي احنا بنقول ايه. انا مش برتجل اجي في وقت الاكزام وبعدين اجي اشوف طب ده سيكشوال وده اسيكشوال، طب ايه النقط الديفرنس اللي بينهم. لا ده انا ابقى فاهم في الاول مرتب. اقول هو السيكشوال ده يعني ايه؟ يعني ريبرودكشن بتوين ميل اند فيميل، لكن التاني سنجل بيرنت. طب ارجع للسيكشوال، هو ميل وفيميل ليه؟ علشان دول لازم يعملوا ميل جاميت وفيميل جاميت، يبقى هنا في السيكشوال في برودكشن اوف جاميتس، لكن هناك مفيش في الاسيكشوال جاميتس. طب هي الجاميتس دي جت منين؟ جت من مايوزس ديفيجن. لكن التاني بيحصل بالميتوزس ديفيجن في الاسيكشوال ريبرودكشن. طب هو المايوزس ديفيجن ده مهم في ايه؟ اصل ده بيعمل جيناتيك فاريشن. طالما ده بيعمل جيناتيك فاريشن يبقى الناحيه الثانيه في الميتوزس ديفيجن او الاسيكشوال ريبرودكشن باي ميتوزس ديفيجن مفيش فاريشن. طب لما اجي في السيكشوال ريبرودكشن طب في فاريشن، يبقى الليفنج اورجانيزم سيميلر ولا ديفرنت؟ لا هنا هيبقى ديفرنت ليفنج اورجانيزمز او ديفرنت جيناتيك ستراكشر اوف ذا اورجانيزمز، لكن الثاني هيبقوا سيميلر جيناتيكلي تو ايتش اذر. طب هو مين اللي يقدر يبقى عنده ميل وفيميل ويعمل جاميت ويعمل مايوزس ديفيجن عشان يعمل فاريشن عشان يبقى الليفنج اورجانيزمز ديفرنت تو ايتش اذر؟ ده انا عايز هاير ليفنج اورجانيزمز. لكن الاسيكشوال ممكن تبقى محتاجه لور ليفنج اورجانيزمز. طب لما اجي ارجع تاني للمايوزس ديفيجن، هو المايوزس ديفيجن ده ليه حاجه اسمها ادفانتجز وديس ادفانتجز ولا لا؟ مميزاته كان بيعمل لي ده فاريشن، وبالتالي فاريشن يعني ذا ليفنج اورجانيزم كان توليريت ذا تشينج ان ذا انفايرمنتال كونديشنز، يقدر يتعايش مع اي تغير لان هم مش كلهم زي بعضهم، في حد هيتحمل وحد لا. لكن في الاسيكشوال كله زي بعضه، يبقى هنا مش هيقدر في حاجه، مش هيقدر يعمل تشينج او or tolerate with the change in the environmental conditions or adapt with the change in the environmental conditions. بس السكشوال ريبرودكشن ده ليه ديس ادفانتجز. هي ايه؟ ده بيحتاج more time and energy. عايز وقت علشان يدي يعمل ريبرودكشن. ليفنج اورجانيزمز لازم تعمل جروس، محتاج انرجي كتير علشان توصل للسكشوال ماتيوريتي علشان تدي انديفيدوال تاني، لكن الاسكشوال ده ما بيحصلش فيه. ده اي ليفنج اورجانيزم بيعمل ريبرودكشن. برضو في السكشوال ريبرودكشن ده بيحتاج بيولوجيكال كوست، عايز في تكلفه بيولوجيه، لان الفيميلز بس اللي بتعمل ريبرودكشن، الميلز والسمول ليفنج اورجانيزمز اللي ما وصلتش الماتيوريتي مش هتعمل، لكن التاني كل الليفنج اورجانيزمز بتعمل ريبرودكشن. وممكن ندي اكزامبل حضراتكم. السكشوال ريبرودكشن ممكن نقول تيكس بليس باي جاميتس اور باي كونجوجيشن، والاسكشوال ريبرودكشن عندنا 6 تايبس اوف السكشوال ريبرودكشن، ممكن ندي اكزامبل من اي منهم. يبقى الكومباريزون اللي قدامنا دي هي كبيره وكتيره، بس نفهمها كويس. مش بالضروره يقول لي اعمل كومبير بين كل البوينتس دي، لا، ممكن يقول لك ان ترمز اوف اي حاجات هو محتاجها، وبالتالي امشي بالترتيب بتاعنا. هو دايما السكشوال ريبرودكشن ده عايز ميل وفيميل، ده يبقى في الهاير ليفنج اورجانيزمز. وطالما تو بيرنتس يبقى تو بيرنتس ميل وفيميل، ليه؟ عشان ده بيعمل جاميتس، ده لا. الجاميتس بتيجي مايوزس بالمايوزس، لكن ده مايتوزس. ده طالما مايوزس يبقى هيديني جيناتيك فاريشن، الثاني لا. ده ادابت وذ نيو كونديشنز، علشان ده عمل جيناتيك فاريشن قبلها، لكن الثاني لا. الاوف سبرينج هنا ديفرنت، علشان هنا في مايوزس عملت تشينج في الجيناتيك تريتس، او اداني جيناتيك فاريشن. اجي هنا الاقي ان ده نيد لونج تايم اند انرجي، يعني ده عنده محتاج وقت وانرجي كتير، لكن ده لا. ده عنده بيولوجيكال كوست، لان الفيميل بس اللي بتعمل ريبرودكشن، الثاني لا. لما نيجي نقول في كومباريزون لازم اخد بالي النقط تبقى مترتبه في دماغي عشان اعرف اقولها كلها صح وما اقفش فيها، خصوصا لو كومباريزون كبيره. لو كومباريزون صغيره مش مشكله، في كومباريزون تبقى محتاجه ديفينيشن واكزامبل بس تبقى سهله. اللي بعدها بيقول لي compare between scalary form conjugation and lateral conjugation. scalary form conjugation ده بيحصل بين ايه وايه؟ هي scalary form اصلا يعني ايه؟ يعني ladder، يعني سلم. يعني ايه؟ يعني انا عايز two parallel ribbon to each other and the presence of conjugation tubes formed between them in the form of the rungs of the ladder. كأن two parallel ribbon دول كأنهم two strands of the ladder، والرانجز دي هي الكونجوجيشن تيوبس. يبقى لازم واحده من البروتوبلازم of one cell migrates through the conjugation tube and fuse with the other one. يبقى هنا واحد من التو ريبونز هيبقى فاضي، والتاني هيبقى فيه زيجوسبور. ده مش ده في اللاترال conjugation، لا، ده between two cells in the same ribbon. One, the protoplasm of one of them migrate to the neighbor one. يبقى هلاقي الريبون واحده فاضيه، واحده فيها زيجوسبور، واحده فاضيه في نفس الريبون، لكن الثاني هلاقي ريبون فاضي وريبون فيه زيجوسبور. نبص على الكومباريزون. في السكالاري فورم كونجوجيشن ده between two cells in two parallel filaments or two parallel ribbons. يبقى هنا هيتعمل conjugation tube perpendicular to each other. الconjugation tube هتبقى عموديه كده بين ده وبين ده، لكن هنا after the conjugation cells of one filaments become empty، لكن الثانيه هتبقى containing zygospore. لو انا فهمت النقط دي خلاص هتبقى الثانيه عكسها. يبقى هنا ده between two adjacent cells in the same filament or the same ribbon، ما بيبقاش فيه conjugation parallel to each other. ممكن اسمي الوول الباسج of protoplasm of one cell through the wall to fuse with the other one، ممكن نسميها conjugation tube, but it's not perpendicular between two filaments. After conjugation, one cell is empty, but the other will containing, or the adjacent one containing the zygospore. The next comparison. Compare between the natural parthenocarpy and the artificial parthenocarpy. لما اتكلم في natural parthenocarpy وartificial parthenocarpy، هو مبدئيا parthenocarpy is the ability of the ovary of the flower to develop to produce the fruit without seeds or seedless fruit without pollination or fertilization. طب ممكن يحصل naturally في ايه وartificially في ايه؟ natural ده ممكن يحصل في البنانا والسيدلس اورنج والسيدلس جرابس وحاجات كتير، لكن الارتفيشال ده اللي احنا بنعمله as that in cucumber and tomato in many of the fruits. So the natural parthenocarpy is the formation of fruit from the flower without fertilization or without using any stimulus. احنا ما بنعملش stimulus خالص، ده بيحصل natural. لكن في الارتفيشال لازم يبقى فيه stimuli as spraying some of the substance as indole or nephthol acetic acid or the extraction of the pollen grain over the stigma. لما اجي في الناتشورال هلاقي as that in banana, the pineapple, seedless orange and seedless grapes. لكن التاني as that in the cucumber and the tomato. The next comparison. Compare between male gamete and female gamete. ابدا من الميل جاميت، ده كان ايه؟ ده كان سبور ماذر سيل، والفيميل جاميت سبور ماذر سيل. لكن لما اجي في الميل الاقي ان السبور ماذر سيل فورم 4 جاميتس، لكن في الفيميل بيعمل 1 جاميت اند 3 بولار باديز. طب طالما دي بيعمل 4 يبقى النمبر اوف ميل جاميتس اكتر ولا الفيميل؟ يبقى النمبر اوف ميل جاميتس greater than that of the female gametes. طب لما ده وحده ماذر سيل بتبقى 4 يبقى السايز بتاع السيلز دي هتبقى سمول ان سايز. لكن لما اجي في الجنب التاني لما اجي اشوف الفيميل جاميت لا دي بتعمل وحده فيميل جاميت و3 بولار باديز، لان واحده بتاخد كل السيتوبلازم والفود بتاع الفور سيلز والثلاثه الباقيين بيبقوا بولار باديز يعني نيوكلاي من غير سيتوبلازم. طيب يبقى الميل جاميت دي صغيره ليه؟ اصل دي لازم هتتحرك يبقى ليها موفابل اورجان علشان تروح للفيميل جاميت. الفيميل جاميت دي كبيره وهتشيل الامبريو كمان جواها، وبالتالي ما تبقاش موبايل او ما تبقاش موفابل جاميت. لكن الميل جاميت كانت موفابل يبقى الفيميل جاميت نون موفابل. مين اللي هتعمل الامبريو؟ مين اللي هيبقى جواها الامبريو؟ الفيميل جاميت اللي كان فيها السيتوبلازم الكتير والفود الكتير. يبقى لما اجي اعمل كومباريزون كده بين الميل جاميت والفيميل جاميت هاخد بالي ان المذر سيل عند الميل جاميت بتدي 4 جاميتس باي ميتوزس، لكن الثانيه بتدي 1 جاميت اند 3 بولار بادز. طالما بتدي 4 يبقى دي جريت ان نمبر، يبقى الثانيه فيو ان نمبر. هنا عندها 4 يبقى كل تقسم السيتوبلازم على 4 فبقى ليتل اماونت اوف سيتوبلازم وليتل اماونت اوف فود، لكن الثاني جريت اماونت اوف سيتوبلازم اند جريت اماونت اوف فود. هي صغيره وفيها فود قليل علشان دي محتاجين انها تتحرك، يبقى لازم يبقى ليها موفابل اورجن وهي تبقى موبايل جاميت، لكن الثانيه طبعا الفيميل ما ينفعش يبقى كده. علشان تعمل بنتريشن للفيميل جاميت لازم تبقى بوينتد، يعني ليها شكل مدبب كده علشان تقدر تعمل بنتريشن، لكن الثانيه بتبقى اوفال او سفيريكال. طبعا الفانكشن بتاع الميل جاميت دي كاري الميل جينيتيك ماتيريالز ان ذا نيوكليوس اوف ذا هيد اوف ذا sperm or the gamete to fuse the two with the nucleus of the female gamete. لكن الفانكشن بتاع الفيميل جاميت دي develop after the fertilization to form the embryo. طبعا الميل جاميت as that formed in the anther of the flower, the antheridia of the furnace tastes in the animals, but in the case of the female gamete that takes place inside the ovaries of the animals and the plants and the archegonia in furnace. وندي example للميل جاميت as the sperm pollen grains، لكن تانية as the ova and ovules. The next question. External fertilization and internal fertilization. External fertilization means fertilization takes place outside the female body or in water that takes place in the aquatic animals that live in water. The female put the female gametes in water, after that the male put the sperms in water for the fertilization of the female gametes. So the embryonic stages developed in the water. But in the case of the internal fertilization that takes place inside the female body, where the male gametes introduced inside the female reproductive system for the fertilization of the female gamete to form the embryo, and the embryo developed inside the female reproductive system. So in the external fertilization both of male and the female gamete put their gametes in water، لكن الثانية لازم sperms in eggs inside the female bodies. Fertilization هنا takes place outside the body or in water، لكن الثانية inside the body. The embryonic development stages that completed inside the water, that in the case of the external fertilization, but the internal fertilization as that in mammals, the embryonic stages are completed inside the female body. ندي example external as that in aquatic animals like bony fish and the frogs or toads, but in the case of the internal fertilization as that in the reptiles, birds, most of the insects and worms. The next question. Male gonads in adiantum and the female gonads in adiantum. The male gonads in adiantum is the antheridia, but the female is the archegonia. كأننا بنقول compare between antheridia and archegonia. The inside the antheridia, the presence of or the antheridia are present in the lower level of the anterior region of the gametophyte. لما اجي برسم الجاميتوفايت كده يبقى اول حاجه هعملها تحت رايزويدز، وبعدين فوقها بعمل الانثريديا، وبعدين فوقها كمان بعمل اركيجونيا. يبقى معنى كده ان الانثريديا دي هتبقى at the lower part of the green heart shaped structure which is called the gametophyte. هنلاقي ال upper side of the antheridia the presence of the archegonia. The antheridia responsible for the formation of sperms or the ciliated sperms in the case of the ferns that produced as a result of mitosis or mitotic division, because the gametophyte is haploid, and also the formation of the egg cell or the female gamete in the archegonia takes place also by mitosis division. The next question. Androsium and gynosium. We understand that the androsium is the male organ of the flowering plants, but the gynosium is a female organ. The androsium consists of stamens. Each stamen consists of filament and the anther containing 4 sacs of pollen grains. But the gynosium is the female organ of the flowering plants. The gynosium composite of the carpels. Each carpel consists of ovary, style, and stigma. The ovary containing the ovules. So that's the comparison between the androsium and the gynosium. Androsium is a male organ, but the gynosium is a female organ. Androsium consists of stamens. Each stamen consists of filament and the anther, which containing 4 pollen sacs. But in the case of the female organ, the gynosium consists of carpels. Each carpel consists of ovary, style, and stigma. The cells of the anther divide by meiosis division or meiotically to produce the male gametes اللي هي البولين جرينز، لكن الثانيه برضو by meiosis or meiotic division to produce the gametes which are called the ovules. The next question. The compare between parthenogenesis and parthenocarpy. Parthenogenesis that takes place in animals, but parthenocarpy takes place in plants. طب نرجع للبارثينوجينيسيس. قلنا the ability of the unfertilized ovum to develop to produce complete individual without pollination or fertilization. برضه في pollination و fertilization في الانيمالز، لكن لما اجي للبارثينوكاربي اقول the ability of the ovary to develop to produce fruits without seeds without pollination or fertilization. وبعدين نقول ال kind of artificial types of the parthenogenesis والارتفيشال والناتشورال بارثينوجينيسيس والارتفيشال والناتشورال بارثينوكاربي، وندي اكزامبل هنا وهنا وتبقى دي الكومباريزون. كومباريزون بتقول لي بس ايه هو البارثينوجينيسيس وايه هو البارثينوكاربي، وبعد كده بنقول لي ايه اللي بيحصل علشان يحصل ده وده. طبعا البارثينوجينيسيس is the kind of asexual reproduction, but the parthenocarpy is the kind of growth. It's not act as a kind of reproduction. نمسك الكومباريزون كده واحده واحده. هنلاقي ان الديفينيشن بتاع البارثينوجينيسيس the ability of the unfertilized egg to develop into new individual without being fertilized by male gamete. لكن هنا parthenocarpy ability of the ovary to develop into seedless fruit without pollination or fertilization. البارثينوجينيسيس produce complete and fertile living organism but they may be one sex. بيدي ليفنج اورجانيزم، لان احنا قلنا ان البارثينوجينيسيس ده كايند اوف اسexual ريبرودكشن، لكن البارثينوكاربي ما نقدرش نقول ان هو ريبرودكشن اصلا، لا هو سيكشوال ولا هو اسexual، هو جروس بس. برضه هتكلم عن البارثينوجينيسيس، بنقول ان هو سبيشال كايند اوف اسexual reproduction leading to form new individual، وهو طبعا special kind عشان from the females only. لكن اجي هنا kind of gross not leading to form new individual، يبقى هو مش reproduction اصلا. طبعا البارثينوجينيسيس in animals and parthenocarp in plant. ونقول الناتشورال parthenogenesis زي الهاني بي والافيد insect without using any stimulus or any stimuli. لكن لما اجي هنا برضه الناتشورال دي in banana and pineapple that means the formation of fruit without seeds، برضه without the interference of the human beings. لكن الارتفيشال بارثينوجينيسيس هنا ده از ستار فيش فروج رابت، ونقول الاستيمولاي اللي زي الالكتريك شوك والراديشن والسولتس والبريكنج ذا اوفم ويز نيدل وهكذا. لكن باجي للارتفيشال بارثينو كاربي هنقول از cucumber the tomato، ونقول stimuli as a spraying of the stigma of the flower with the andol or naphthol acetic acid or the extraction of the pollen grains. The next question: compare between identical or monozygotic and fraternal or dizygotic twins. من حيث المبدأ برضو لما اجي اقول monozygotic او identical twins يبقى لازم يبقى produced from one ovum with one sperm، لكن الفراترنال لازم two ova with two sperms. طب لما تبقى one ovum with one sperm يبقى genetically similar to each other، لكن هنا دول just two living organisms may be similar to each other in sex or different in each other in sex, but they are different in each other genetically. يبقى هنا عشان one ovum and one sperm دول genetically similar دول genetically different. طب لما يبقوا genetically similar يبقى has the same sex, the same blood group, the same skin color, the same eye color, the same hair color، هما as a external feature similar to each other. لكن التانيين ممكن يبقوا same sex او different، ممكن same blood group او different، هم بس مجرد اخوات بس، لكن ممكن يبقوا زي بعض في حاجات او مش زي بعض في حاجات. لكن identical twins دول genetically similar to each other. ممكن identical twins نلاقيهم adhere or attach each other in a certain part of the body which is called the siamic twins. لكن ما فيش siamic twins في الفراترنال. في نفس الوقت دايما الايدنتيكال توينز نلاقيهم has the same placenta، ممكن يبقى ليهم السيم امبريو ساك or two different embryo sac، لكن كل الفراترنال with two different placenta two different embryo sac and they different to each other genetically and there is no siames in the fraternal twins. شوف الكومباريزون كده بتقول لي ان الايدنتيكال توينز ده is result from the fertilization of one ovum by single sperm، لكن التاني لازم يبقى two fertilization of two ova with two different sperms. في نمبر 2 بنقول ان ده the developing cells the developing cells separate into two masses of cells but they similar to each other because so each of them form embryo، لكن هنا دول two zygotes each zygote develop to produce complete individual. طبعا هنا ال two embryos are identical genetically علشان هي كانت one ovum one sperm، لكن هنا دول genetically different to each other. دايما نلاقي ان الايدنتيكال has one ممكن يبقى one embryo sac او two embryo sac لكن the same placenta، لكن التاني الفراترنال with two placenta and two embryo sac two embryo sac. الايدنتيكال twins they have the same genetic characters، كل الكاركترز بقى الاي كلر والسكين كلر والبلاد جروبس وكده، لكن التاني هيبقوا different ممكن يبقوا similar او different in a certain characters. They have the same characters قلنا زي ايه؟ طبعا there the twins in the identical twins the twins may be adhere each other partially in a certain part of the body which are called the Siamese twins, which can be surgically separated in most cases, but there is no Siamese in the case of the fraternal twins. The next question: compare between gametophyte in adiantum and the sporophyte in adiantum. The sporophyte in adiantum or Polypodium fugira furnace, that's the same gametophyte and the sporophyte. Gametophyte is formed as a germination of one spore haploid cell, but the sporophyte is formed due to the development of the zygote 2N. Gametophyte divided by mitosis only to form gametes, but the sporophyte divided by meiosis to form spores. The gametophyte act as a temporary stage because the sporophyte depends on the gametophyte to grow. After the growth of the sporophyte and the formation of roots, the degeneration takes place of the gametophyte. But the sporophyte act as a dominant stage, it is still as a dominant stage. So the gametophyte produced from the germination of a spore, but the sporophyte from the growth of the zygote. The shape of gametophyte is a flat green heart-shaped structure, but the sporophyte is a green plant with the root, stem, and leaves. The gametophyte chromosomal structure or chromosomal set is haploid 1N, but the sporophyte 2N. The gametophyte has antheridia and archegonia, which act as gonads of the furnace, but the sporophyte containing sori, each sorus containing the sporangium, which contains the spore mother cell 2N. Reproduction sexually takes place by gametes in the case of the gametophyte because it form male and female gamete, but the reproduction asexual by sporogeny in the case of the sporophyte. The gametophyte reproduction by mitosis to produce gamete, but in the case of the sporophyte by meiosis or meiotically to produce spores. The gametophyte absorb water by the presence of rhizoids, but that's in the case of the sporophyte by roots. In the case of the gametophyte, the gametophyte degenerates after the formation of the sporophyte, but it still produces spores, so that act as a dominant stage. The next question. Compare between tissue culture and embryonic culture. الحقيقه كم كبير جدا من الاسئله بنراجع بيها الجزء بتاع reproduction. الريبرودكشن كبير وكتير وفي ديتيلز شويه بتحتاج ريفيجن كتير. Tissue culture and embryonic culture. The tissue culture is in the case of the tissue culture, a small piece of plant to grow and develop into a complete plant, as that in the carrot, if it put a piece of carrot in the nutritive medium as a coconut milk. But in the case of the embryo culture, by the spreading or separation between the cells of early embryonic stages and the culture of each of them inside the uterus of females that produce complete individual. The tissue culture takes place in plant and may takes place in some of the animal tissue, but the embryonic culture takes place in animal. So the importance of the tissue culture is the propagation of rare plants, solve the food problem because that increase the amount of the plants, and short the time of cultivation. But in the case of the embryo culture that propagate rare animals that act as a kind of asexual reproduction. But that's not the importance is the propagation of rare plant which exposed to extinction to increase the number of these animals. In animals, the animals which exposed to extinction means the number of animals decrease and the capacity of reproduction decrease. So that need to propagate this kind of animals which exposed to extinction, so we need or carry out the embryonic culture. Example of the tissue culture is the carrot and the tobacco plant. If you put a piece of carrot or piece of tobacco plant in the nutritive medium, that develop to produce complete plant. In the case of the embryo culture, that takes place in rabbit, mice, or any animals that exposed to extinction. The next question. Compare between FSH hormone and LH hormone. FSH hormone in female and males, and also the LH hormone in male and female. In female, the FSH hormone stimulates the ovary to produce Gravian follicle, which secretes estrogen hormone. But in the case of LH hormone, that stimulates the gravium follicle to release the mature ova and change into corpus luteum, which secretes estrogen and progesterone hormone. The FSH hormone and the LH hormone, both of them are secreted from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. But the FSH hormone is secreted during the proliferation phase, but the other or LH hormone during the ovulation. In males, the FSH hormone stimulates the formation of the seminiferous tubules and spermatozoa or the sperms and the prostate gland in males. But in the other hand, the LH hormone stimulates the males to form the interstitial cells and the secretion or control the secretion of male hormones. That is the comparison between FSH hormone and LH hormone. The last question: what's the place and the function of each of the following? The acrosome, prostate gland, corpus luteum, hyaluronic acid, and the importance of gametophyte in the life cycle of the polypodium. احنا لما بنيجي عايز سايت اند فانكشن، يبقى انا بعمل تيبل زي اللي قدامنا ده. التيبل دون هيبقى فيه الستراكشر اللي هو عايزه، السايت، وبعدين الفانكشن عشان تبقى الاجابه منظمه. لما اجي اشوف الاكروسوم هقول ان السايت in the head of the sperm. طب الفانكشن بتاعه secrete hyaluronase enzyme or hyaluronic enzyme. The enzyme dissolves the hyaluronic acid to remove the coat around the ovum to facilitate its penetration process by sperm. The prostate gland that acts as the accessory gland in the male reproductive system around the neck of the urinary bladder. But in the case but the function of the prostate gland, it secretes sugary solution to feed the sperms, secretes as a function of the accessory glands, secrete the alkaline substance to neutralize the acidic urinogenital duct before the passage of the sperms. Number 3, the corpus luteum, that's inside the female ovary, that responsible for the production of the mature ova. The gravium follicle release the mature ova and they change into corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum responsible for the secretion of estrogen and the progesterone hormone, which increase the thickness of the endometrium and adheres the endometrium in the uterine muscle. The hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid, the acid that adheres the membrane around the ovum. The hyaluronic acid is dissolved by the enzyme which is called the hyaluronase enzyme to allow or to facilitate the penetration process. The last point, the gametophyte in the life cycle of furnace. Gametophyte that carry the genital organs of the plant that act as the antheridia and the archegonia. The antheridia responsible for the secretion or the production of male hormones, but the archegonia responsible for the production of the male gametes, and the antheridia produce male gametes, but the archegonia produce the egg cell which act as the female gamete, where sexual reproduction takes place in the gametophyte which act as a temporary stage. My dear students, that's the end of this revision of reproduction in living organisms. عملنا ريفيجن على نقط كتيرة جدا جدا. جبنا المنهج كله تقريبا او الشابتر كله تقريبا قسمناه مرة multiple choice، مرة what happened، مرة give reason، مرة comparison. نعمل الريفيجن ده هيلاقي شابتر reproduction of living organisms شابتر 2 ده هتلاقيه شابتر جميل ولذيذ. My dear students, that's the end of this part. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good luck.